this episode, we turn to what is likely the earliest Christian document we possess, Paul's first letter to the Thessalonians. What did the movement look like only 20 years after Yeshua? Was it already breaking with Jewish tradition, or still rooted within it? Let us listen carefully.
When we read 1 Thessalonians, we find ourselves far from Galilee and Judea. We are no longer among Jewish disciples in the land of Israel, but in a busy Roman port city, Thessaloniki in Macedonia. Here live Greek-speaking Gentiles. They did not grow up with the Tanakh. They did not know Israel's covenant story from the inside. They did not hear Yeshua themselves. They encountered the message through Paul, and that matters. It is also worth remembering how far Thessalonica was from Jerusalem, roughly 1,500 kilometers by ancient routes. Such a journey would have taken weeks, combining sea travel and long stretches of Roman roads. News moved slowly. Thessalonica was not only distant from Jerusalem, but firmly within the sphere of Rome. The message about Yeshua was already crossing geographical and cultural boundaries, and distance inevitably shapes interpretation. Because when we read 1 Thessalonians, we are not reading the direct words of Yeshua. We are reading Paul's interpretation of who Yeshua is, addressed to a Gentile minority community about 20 years after the crucifixion. So what do we find in this letter? One of the first things we notice is the strong expectation that Yeshua will return. After the crucifixion, hopes quickly arose that he would come again. This was not foreign to Jewish thought. Jewish apocalyptic tradition already spoke about the coming of the Son of Man, the resurrection at the end of the age, and God's decisive intervention in history. When Paul proclaims that Yeshua will return, he is still operating within a Jewish horizon of hope. Yet the tone is intense. He writes as if the return could happen within his own generation. We who are alive, he says. Historically, it did not unfold in that way. Did Paul make a mistake? Perhaps. He lived with an apocalyptic expectation common to his time, but he gives no date. He expresses urgency and nearness, not a calendar prediction. Paul also speaks of the coming wrath. In the Synoptic Gospels, we certainly find judgment and seriousness. But there, judgment often appears as God setting the world right, restoring justice, lifting up the oppressed, and holding wrongdoers accountable. In the prophets of the Tanakh, we find another powerful vision. The nations are not simply destroyed. They stream to Zion. They come to learn the ways of the Lord. Judgment clears the ground, but restoration follows. The nations lay down their weapons. Torah goes forth from Jerusalem. This is a vision of reordering the world, not erasing it. In Paul's language, however, judgment appears as wrath, something from which people must be saved. At first glance, this can sound more absolute, less oriented toward a gradual gathering of nations. Does this leave room for the prophetic vision of nations streaming to Israel? The tension is real. Yet Paul does not exclude the nations. He includes them. Gentiles are already turning from idols to serve the living God. The difference may lie not in whether the nations are saved, but in how that salvation is framed, not as pilgrimage to Zion, but as participation in the Messiah. The emphasis may feel different. With Yeshua, the central image is the kingdom of God arriving. With Paul, the central concern is salvation from the coming judgment. Yet hope remains present. Paul reassures his readers, God has not destined us for wrath, but for salvation. Now let us look at Paul's ethics. What kind of life does he expect from this community? He tells them to abstain from sexual immorality, to live in holiness, to work with their own hands, not to become a burden, and not to repay evil for evil. All of this is fully compatible with Jewish moral tradition. And something striking appears here. We find no polemic against the law of Moses in this letter. There is no debate about circumcision, no opposition between faith and works, no argument against Torah practice. If we read 1 Thessalonians in isolation, we do not see an explicit break with the Tanakh. Paul proclaims the God of Israel. He rejects idolatry. He includes Gentiles in the hope, something already anticipated in the prophets. The sharp conflict that later appears in Galatians is not yet visible. So what kind of movement are we observing? The community in Thessalonica appears as a small minority movement with strong identity and high commitment. For modern readers, it may almost resemble a closed environment. There is a clear distinction between believers and outsiders. There is strong loyalty. There is intense expectation of the Lord's return. Yet they are not told to withdraw from society. They are told to live quietly, to work, and to remain integrated within the city. This is not a destructive cult. It is an apocalyptic minority seeking to live faithfully under pressure. Now we come to Paul's words about the dead. Some in the community have died. The grief is real. If the Lord is coming soon, what about those who have already passed away? Paul responds that the dead will rise first. Then those who are alive will meet the Lord in the clouds. In Roman cities, the dead were often buried along the roads outside the city walls. As one approached the city, one would pass their monuments. The image may have been concrete. Those lying out there will not miss anything. The word used for meeting was often employed when citizens went out of a city to greet an arriving king and escort him back. This does not necessarily mean that believers leave the earth. It may be royal symbolism, welcoming the true ruler. But if we press the language into strict literalism, practical questions arise. Is Yeshua to arrive over one city at a time? Must he travel from place to place? Can he be present in all cities simultaneously? And what about those living in the countryside or up in the mountains? Are they excluded from this meeting? Questions like these show the limits of a strictly literal reading. Paul is most likely speaking in metaphorical, apocalyptic language. His concern is not geography, but revelation. Not coordinates, but the manifestation of the Lord's kingship to all. In the Tanakh, to come with the clouds signifies divine authority and revelation, not meteorology. The event is portrayed as cosmic and universal, not geographically coordinated. The point is not aerial mechanics. The point is the revelation of kingship. The comfort is not in logistics, it is in communion, and so we will always be with the Lord. Another important observation is that 1 Thessalonians does not contain the fully developed theology that appears later in Romans. There is no extended discussion of justification by faith, no Adam-Christ contrast, no systematic analysis of the law's role. The language is simpler and more pastoral. This may suggest that Paul's theology was still developing. What later becomes known as Pauline theology does not yet appear in fully formed structure here. If we read 1 Thessalonians on its own, the movement appears as a Jewish apocalyptic renewal that has begun to include Gentiles, not an open rupture. Paul claims to serve the God of Israel. He anchors himself in the hope of resurrection. He rejects idolatry. Whether he later moves into deeper tension with Torah interpretation belongs to the letters that follow. And that leaves us with a larger question. Within 2 decades of Yeshua, we see a Gentile community far from Judea, a strong expectation of the Lord's return, language of judgment and salvation, ethics compatible with Jewish moral tradition, and no explicit law controversy. How did the movement develop so rapidly? What was preserved from Yeshua's own proclamation? What was reshaped? And where does the tension between continuity and departure begin? Those are the questions we now carry with us into the next letter.
We see a movement still close to its Jewish apocalyptic roots, expecting resurrection, affirming the God of Israel, and living with moral seriousness. The deeper conflict over the Torah, the Jewish law, has not yet surfaced. In our next episode, we turn to Galatians, where that tension becomes clear. Thank you for listening to the Yeshua Community.